Good day, everyone. Today we will discuss the nature of the colonized. So let's talk about the pre-colonial Philippines first. The Philippines is an archipelago consisting of more than 7,000 islands and islets lying southeast of the coast of the mainland of Asia. It extends a little over 16 degrees of latitude from 4 degrees 45 degrees to 21 degrees north and longitude from 116 degrees 40 degrees to 126 degrees 30 degrees east. It is also bounded in the north and west by the South China Sea, in the east by the Pacific Ocean, and in the south by the Celebes Sea and the waters of Borneo. The 11 islands of primary geographical importance are Luzon, Mindanao, Samar, Panay, Negros, Palawan, Mindoro, Leyte, Cebu, Masbate, and Bohol. The total land area, excluding the bodies of water surrounded by land such as Laguna de Bay, Taal Lake, Lake Lanao, and many more like this, is 300,000 square kilometers. Moreover, outstanding physical features of the Philippines include the irregular configuration of the archipelago, the great extent of mountainous country, the narrow and uninterrupted coastal plains, the generally northward trend of the river systems, and the spectacular lakes. The islands are composed primarily of volcanic rock and coral, but all principal rock formations are present. Volcanoes dot the three geographic regions of the country and have been, for centuries, one of the natural causes of destruction of life and property. At least 10 of these volcanoes are considered active, the rest are dormant. The Philippines lies within the Pacific seismic belt and has consequently experienced severe earthquakes. The country is also rich in natural resources that are as yet largely undeveloped. Its fertile plains and rich valleys produce diverse crops, a few of which are produced for export and the rest for local consumption. In terms of its people, Filipinos belong to a mixture of races, although basically they are Malay. Centuries of cultural and commercial contacts with the countries of Asia and almost four centuries of domination by Western powers have made the Filipino comparatively sophisticated. There is in this there is in them a blending of the East and the West, so that their character exhibits curious contradictions which foreigners are apt to misunderstand. It is difficult, if not impossible, to define what a Filipino is. All that can be done is to pick out some traits common to the average Filipinos, and basically Malay characterizes the Filipinos as a people. So how did East meet West? During their 16th century expansion into the east, explorers bearing the Spanish flag encountered several uncharted territories. Under royal decree, Spanish colonizers eventually demarcated the broad geographical expanse of hundreds of islands into a single colony, thus coalescing large groups of cultural areas with varying degrees of familiarity with one another as Las Islas Filipinas. The Portuguese navigator and explorer Ferdinand Magellan headed the first Spanish foray to the Philippines when he arrived on Homonhon Island in March 1521. A short time later he met an untimely death on the nearby island of Mactan. Roy Lopez de Villalobos, claiming this area for the future King Philip II of Spain in 1543, took possession of the islands then and named the archipelago as Las Islas Filipinas while imagining the first borders of the future Philippine state. However, Villalobos also led a failed attempt to colonize the Philippines. Hence, after King Philip II, for whom the islands are named, had sent out Miguel Lopez de Legazpi, who established the first permanent Spanish settlement in Cebu in 1565. The Spanish city of Manila was founded in 1571, and by the end of the 16th century, most of the coastal and lowland areas from Luzon to northern Mindanao were under Spanish control. Friars marched with soldiers and soon accomplished the nominal conversion to Roman Catholicism of all the local people under Spanish administration. But the Muslims of Mindanao and Sulu, whom the Spanish called Moros, were never completely subdued by Spain. So, what is the immediate Philippine society upon Spanish contact? At the time of the conquest, the immediate Philippine society upon Spanish contact was the barangay, which from the Malay term balangay, meaning abode. The barangays were generally small. Most villages boasted of only 30 to 100 houses, and their population varied from 100 to 500 persons. According to the reports of Legazpi, he found communities of from 20 to 30 people only. Many Visayan villages fringing the coast consisted of no more than 8 to 10 houses. There were, however, some giant barangays. Manila had about 2,000 inhabitants at the time of conquest, but this was the exception rather than the rule. Most communities were coastal, near coastal, or riverine in orientation. This was because the principal sources of protein came from the seas and the rivers, the people relying more on fishing than on hunting for sustenance. The autonomous barangay communities that the Spaniards encountered were in the main primitive economic units with a system of subsistence agriculture which provided them with barely enough for their needs. At the time of the Spanish conquest, the barangays were societies in various levels of transition from the primitive communal state to an Asiatic form of feudalism in the Muslim South. Even the least advanced of the established communities exhibited the beginnings of social stratification, while the most developed, the Muslims, showed a more elaborate system of social divisions. Generally speaking, however, these stratifications were not rigid, pointing to a recent post-communal development. Since the Philippine settlements were subsistence villages, all of the inhabitants, with the possible exception of chieftains in the larger communities, were self-sufficient farmers. Next, what is the political structure of ancient philosophy? So, the absence of public buildings in ancient Philippine society, such as town halls or specialized buildings for governmental administration, indicates the low level of political development. The Muslim inhabitants of the southern islands, who had rajas or sultans in some places, were again set apart from the rest of the population. But in the other communities, the chief figure was the datu, generally a son or underblood relative of the founder of the settlement. Datu is the leader of the barangay. Datus are often the strongest, brightest, and wealthiest members of the barangay, and their primary role is to protect and govern the barangay's economic and political affairs. The status of Datu was inherited and handed down through the male line, but in other cases, the authority of the Datu was reliant on the allegiance of commoners and slaves who might pledge their allegiance to the Datu of their choosing. That were likely more merchants yet. They also launched raids and attacks against another barangay to avenge grievances or battle vendettas. However, other sources claim that the Tatus were traditional leaders, not rulers in the political sense, and certainly they were not kings or princes, as some of the early Spanish chroniclers thought them to be, an error due to the transfer of concepts from the political experience of Europe. On the other hand, the Babylon are pre-colonial masters in astronomy, religion, and medicine. They generally perform the rites and communicate with Anita to determine when it is appropriate to plant. The Babaylan also oversees the rites for funeral ceremonies for the deceased. Babaylan are mostly women, although there are few male Babaylan as well, who must appear like women. The Babaylans lost their prestige and power in their communities with the coming of the Spaniards, and were supplanted by leaders chosen by the Spaniards and by Spanish friars. They led some revolts to revert to their own culture, then gradually being Hispanized by Christianization, but most of all, to regain the freedom they formerly enjoyed as a people. The Bagani is the barangay protector against violence as well as the guardian of peace, order, and stability. The Bagani is known as a warrior priest who has found favor in the eyes of the deity. He is known for his strength and skill in battle, sometimes even returning to the communities unscathed. This is partly due to the deity who affords him the ability to heal, in the same way it affords him the power to kill. The Bagani is a warrior chief, whose leadership is second only to a Likid, a community elder known for the wisdom he passes on to the younger generation through oral tradition, constantly providing counsel in times of conflict. Lastly, the Panday are in charge of making barangay tools, like weapons, farming, and household tools and jewelry. Panday are mostly males, with women in charge of weaving and ceramics. The Datu depends on Panday's production of weapons for warfare and matters of strategic security, and along with the Babaylan, the Panday also conducts rituals to ensure efficacy of his craft and to bestow on the user moral and spiritual confidence. So now let's proceed to the social stratification of ancient Philippine society upon Spanish contact. The Philippine society was categorized into three classes: the Datu, Timawa, and Oripon. The Datus exercised immense power in the barangay and had rights that other people in the community did not have. Datus are rulers as well as among the ruling class. The authority of a Datu was derived from his bloodline, but his power was determined by his wealth, the number of slaves and subjects he had, and his reputation for physical strength. These Datus were members of what social anthropologists refer to as a chiefdom, which was a loose federation of chiefs united by personal commitment to a senior among them. The ruler of such a chiefdom exercised power over his supporting chiefs, but not over their people or territory. His supremacy was based on his control of local or international trade, as well as his capacity to disperse luxury commodities wanted by others. The Timawa were placed next to the Datus. They were the progeny or descendants of a Datus slave concubines or commoner spouses, and they were nominally free since their progenitor had awarded it to them. Timawa paid tribute known as buhis or hando and were allowed to switch allegiances to another Datu. Those linked to their master as personal vassals, on the other hand, paid no tribute and performed no agricultural work. Lastly, the Oripon occupied the lowest strata. Oripon's low social standing was earned by inheritance, wartime imprisonment, failure to pay debts, acquisition, or the commission of a crime for which he was formally condemned. It should be emphasized, however, that the class divisions were not rigid. Any member of the social classes might move up or down the social ladder in accordance with circumstances. The Oripon was subdivided into namamahay and sagigilid. The namamahay possessed his own family and home, and usually served his master throughout the planting and harvest seasons, rode for him, assisted in the construction of his house, and served his visitors. The Sagigilid, on the other hand, had no property, live with the master, and could not even marry without the latter's permission. Next is the political institutions introduced by Spain upon contact with the Philippines. The Spanish colonies established a highly centralized government. This means that the central authority had such influence that nearly everything had to be performed with its approval and authorization. The Governor-General was the King of Spain's designated commander-in-chief of the army and navy. As Governor-General, he was the king's authorized representative in the country. He was also the head of the Real Audiencia, the colony's highest judicial body in terms of civil and criminal matters, and as vice-real patron, he had influence over clerical appointments in the church as well as the authority to monitor mission activities. The Governor-General was the center of civil power for all levels of government. The alcalde mayor for the subjugated regions and areas presided over the alcaldía. The corregidores were in charge of the corregimientos, or unpacified military zones. The alcalde mayor not only possessed executive and judicial authorities, but he also had the specific right of engaging in commerce through the Indulto de Comercio, with the exception of Tondo, Cavite, and Zamboanga, to mention a few. An alcalde mayor or corregidor must only be a Spaniard. He was a judge, encomienda inspector, chief of police, tribute collector, and even vice-regal patron and captain general of the province. Hence, he was not only the executive and judicial authority in his region of duty, but also the military authority, reporting directly to the governor-general and the real audiencia in Manila. The pueblo was led by a gobernadorcillo. A gobernadorcillo might be any Filipino or Chinese mestizo who was 25 years old, proficient in either written or oral Spanish, and had served as a cabeza de barangay for 4 years. Under the Spanish administration, this was the highest official position a Filipino could hold, and his duty, together with that of the parish priest, was seen as extremely important in a town. Among his many administrative responsibilities were the preparation of the patron, or the tribute list, the selection and allocation of men for drop labor, communal public works such as the maintenance and construction of minor bridges, and the quinto, or military conscription, postal clerk and judge in civil cases involving 44 pesos or less. He did in fact interfere in all administrative problems concerning his town, including lands, law, money, and the military forces. The gobernadorcillo was supported by three supernumeraries or inspectors, who oversaw affairs such as cultured field boundaries, livestock branding, and police. Constables, four tenientes segundos, district lieutenants, and a secretary. Lastly, the cabeza de barangay was in charge of the barangay and served as the gobernadorcillo's tax and contribution collector. He, like the gobernadorcillo, was in charge of maintaining peace and order in his specific area and recruiting police for community public works. The Manual del Cabeza de Barangay stipulated that cabezas serving 3-year terms must be fluent in Spanish, of excellent moral character, and property owners. So now let's proceed to the El Consejo de las Indias, or the Council of the Indies. All Spanish possessions were governed by the Real y Supremo Consejo de las Indias, or Royal and Supreme Council of the Indies, established in 1524 by Charles V. It was, next to the king, the paramount lawmaker and administrator overseeing the colonies of the Spanish Empire, guided basically by a compendium of laws, first compiled in 1681 called the Recopilación de Leyes de los Reinos de las Indias. In practice, it prepared the decrees which were issued in the royal name, approved all important acts and expenditures by colonial officials, and acted as court of last resort in civil suits appealed from colonial courts. And so let's proceed with the role and function of the Viceroy of Mexico in relation to the Philippine Islands. The hierarchical political setup of the Philippines during the Spanish regime may be seen in the political institutions established by the colonial power. From 1565 to 1821, the Philippines was a captaincy general administered by the Spanish king through the Viceroyalty of Nueva España. In 1565, Spanish Governor-General Miguel Lopez de Legazpi claimed the Philippines as a Spanish trading post and designated Manila as its capital in 1571. Due to its distance from Spain, the Spanish government assigned Manila's administration and government to the Viceroyalty of New Spain or Mexico for 2.5 centuries. The monarch also had veto power over the promulgation of papal bulls and exercised through his viceroys full supervision over the ecclesiastics in the dominions. Hence, many of the governors of the Philippines were Mexican Creole. The army was recruited from all the populations of New Spain, which led to ethnic and cultural mingling between multiple groups.
Now let's proceed to the role and function of the Governor General. The chief executive of the Philippines during the Spanish period was the Governor General. Through the Consejo de las Indias, the Council of the Indies, the Gobernador y Capitan General served as the king's sole national spokesman and representative in the Philippines. The seat of government was placed in Manila, specifically in Intramuros. So, as the chief executive in the Philippines, the Governor General was responsible for enforcing Spanish law and royal decrees. All subordinate officials, including the alcaldes mayores, were appointed by him. In the exercise of his legislative authority, he enacted and promulgated statutes, rules, and proclamations. The Royal Audiencia was the highest court in the Philippines during the Spanish colonial period, and the Governor General served as its president or presiding officer. As a head of state, he also led the military, and as vice real patron, the governor could also exercise ecclesiastical authority, such as recommending priests for appointment and mediating disputes between religious authorities. During the Encomienda era, the Governor General had complete authority over all church affairs. However, the authority of the Governor General was best demonstrated by his right of complaint, which allowed him to halt implementation of any royal decree or order concerning the Philippines if he determined that doing so would be detrimental to the country's administration. The annual salary for the Governor General was originally set at 40,000 pesos. The corrupt government officials and business people padded the salary with bribes and gifts. Miguel Lopez de Legazpi served as the first Governor General in the Philippines. As previously mentioned, the Royal Audiencia was the highest court in the Philippines during the Spanish colonial period. So, it is the highest court of appeal for both civil and criminal cases. As a result of a royal decree dated May 5, 1583, it was established in the Philippines with the intention of providing justice to the oppressed indigenous people living in the colony. Governor General Santiago de Vera served as its first president. The Audiencia was responsible for a variety of non-judicial tasks in addition to hearing and deciding civil and criminal cases. Some of these tasks included consultations with the Governor General. As a result of the Portonato Real held by the Governor General, the Audiencia was also given opportunity to participate in the appointment of religious officials. The Audiencia is also responsible for conducting annual audits of the colonial government's expenditures. In addition to this, it compiled reports regarding the state of affairs in the Philippines for the King of Spain. Between the years of 1606 and 1717, in the event that the Viceroy of Mexico failed to appoint a Governor General, the Audiencia was responsible for performing the duties of the governor. The Audiencia Real was composed of the governor, which acted as a presiding officer, 8 oidores, literally mean hearers, who serve as judges, real members of the tribunal, a fiscal or prosecuting officer, one alguacil mayor, or chief constable, teniente de gran canciller, or assistant to the grand chancellor, some notaries and clerks. According to Concilio 1990, the Residencia and the Visita were two ancient Castilian institutions brought to the Philippines to curb the abuse of power by royal officials. Although the Residencia had been used in Spain since the 15th century, it was not until 1501 that it was used in the Indies, Spanish colonies in America, including the Philippines. At the conclusion of his term in office, a brief de residencia oversaw a public judicial review of a residenciado, or one judge, imposed on a residenciado who is found guilty of public misconduct were either heavy fines, sequestration of properties, imprisonment, or a combination of all three penalties. The practice of residencia lasted in the colonies until it was finally outlawed in 1799. The visita, in contrast to the residencia, was conducted in secret by a visitador general dispatched from Spain and could take place at any time during the official's term without any advance warning. Both targeted and broad visitas are possible. A general visita meant an investigation of the entire viceroyalty, such as Mexico, or captaincy general, such as the Philippines, while a specific visita meant an investigation of a single official or province. The visita, which was first used in America in 1499, shared with the Residencia the goal of ensuring the faithful and efficient service of government authorities. Offenders could face fines, loss of employment, or expulsion from the colony or combination of these sanctions, depending on the severity of the offense. Meanwhile, the oidores formed part of the Audiencia and served as the judges for both civil and criminal cases. As members of the Audiencia, they were also part of the advisory council to the governor, who was at the same time the president of the Audiencia. As much as the Audiencia acted as an advisory council to the king's representative in the colonial government, the Audiencia was also a check to the powers of the governor. The Alcalde Mayor. The Spaniards created local government units for the provinces, and there were two types of local government units, alcaldía and corregimiento. The head of the alcaldía was the alcalde mayor for the pacified provinces and districts, meaning those that had been fully subjugated or already under Spanish control. The duties and functions of an alcalde mayor include being a judge, inspector of encomiendas, chief of police, tribute collector, and even vice-regal patron and captain general of the province, and hence he was not only the executive and judicial authority in his jurisdiction, but also the military authority responsible only to the governor general under the Audiencia in Manila. Except in a few provinces like Tondo, Cavite, and Zamboanga, the alcalde mayor also had the special privilege of engaging in trade, through the indulto de comercio, or a privilege of alcaldes enjoyed between 1751 and 1844 when it was finally abolished. Prior to 1844, the annual salary of an alcalde mayor ranged between 300 peso to 2,000 peso, but after 1847, it ranged between 1,600 peso to 1,500 peso. In addition to receiving a salary, the alcalde mayor engaged in money lending and opened a store from which Filipinos were compelled to purchase. The corregidors were equivalent to the alcalde mayor, except that they were in charge of the opposite of the alcaldía. The corregimientos, or pacified military zones like Mariveles, Mindoro, and Panay, were headed by the corregidor general, or the commander of the fort. Unpacified refers to those provinces and districts that were not yet fully pacified or conquered by the colonial government. Both alcaldía and corregimiento can only be headed by Spaniards. Let us now proceed to the gobernadorcillo and its role and function. The gobernadorcillo, or little governor, was in charge of the pueblo or municipio. A gobernadorcillo could be any Filipino or Chinese mestizo who was at least 25 years old, literate in oral or written Spanish, and had served as a cabeza de barangay for 4 years. According to Agoncillo 1990, this was the highest government position a Filipino could attain during the Spanish regime, and this role, along with that of the parish priest, was regarded as extremely important in a town. A gobernadorcillo's administrative duties include the preparation of the patron or the tribute list, the recruitment and distribution of men for the draft labor, criminal public works such as the construction and repair of minor bridges, and the quinto or the military conscription, postal clerk and judge in civil cases involving less than 44 pesos. Basically, he intervened in all administrative matters concerning his city, including lands, justice, finances, and the military. For all these works, his annual compensation was 24 peso. Furthermore, the gobernadorcillo was assisted by three supernumeraries or inspectors who oversaw matters such as cultivated field boundaries, branding of livestock, and police, constable, four tenientes segundos, lieutenants of districts, and a secretary. For the cabeza de barangay, the cabeza de barangay is the person who served as the head of the barangay. So they are referred to as the cabeza de barangay. And it was their job to collect taxes and contributions on behalf of the gobernadorcillo. In a manner comparable to that of the gobernadorcillos, cabezas were not subject to taxation as well. In order to show them good treatment and entrust them in our name with the government of Indians, of whom they were formerly the lords, Philip II bestowed the title of Cabezas de Barangay upon the barangay chiefs and bestowed upon them the authority to govern the respective barangays. In a role once more akin to that of the gobernadorcillo, he was accountable for the upkeep of law and order in his community as well as the recruitment of policetas for communal public work projects. According to the manual de Cabeza del Barangay, cabezas who serve for terms of 3 years are required to be literate in Spanish, to be of good moral character, and to be property owners. Approximately in the middle of the 19th century, cabezas who had served for a total of 25 years were exempt from being required to perform forced labor. In addition, according to Concilio 1990, the position of cabeza de barangay did not come with a salary. However, he was granted a portion of the money that was accrued from the payment of taxes in his barrio. In addition to this, he was regarded a member of the Principalia, which is another word for the aristocracy, along with the mayor of the town and the other municipal officials.
This is the illustration of the political administration in the Philippines under Spain. Now, let us move on to the economic institutions introduced by Spain in the Philippines upon contact. Firstly is the encomienda. As a reward for his loyal subjects who helped in the conquest and the establishment of his settlements in the Philippines, the King of Spain ordered the lands to be distributed to them. This is the encomienda. The encomienda was actually not a piece of land, but a favor from the king given to a meritorious Spaniard to exercise control or give them jurisdiction over a specific place, including its inhabitants. The person who received this favor was called an encomendero. They are also tasked to collect tributes or taxes from the inhabitants of the area or place assigned to them. In return, they are supposed to look after the welfare of the natives and bring peace, security, and justice to the people entrusted to him. There are three kinds of encomiendas. First, the royal encomenda, which belong to the king. Second, the ecclesiastical encomenda, which belong to the church. Lastly, the private encomenda, which belonged to a private individual. However, the private encomenda was later on abolished by the king in the 17th century because instead of taking care of the inhabitants in their area, encomenderos were abusing their authority and maltreated the Filipino inhabitants. Next is the realenga. What is a realenga and how was it declared as such? Realengas or crown lands are lands declared to be owned by the Spanish king. In the process of pueblo organization, some natives and barangays lose their lands because they get relocated and physically transferred from their native land or ancient site. Thus, the lands lost by old barangays during the process of relocation, as well as the lands that assigned to them in their pueblos, will immediately be declared as crown lands or realengas. Realengas are completely the opposite of pueblo lands. If pueblo lands are public domain, the concept of realenga is crucial. It is from this that land grants were given to non-Filipinos. The first beneficiaries of these land grants were the conquistadors. The concept of land grants allowed these lands to be owned by an individual. The Recopilación de Leyes de los Reinos de las Islas de Indias is also known as the Laws of the Indies. It is a compendium of laws promulgated by the King of Spain. The Recopilación ordered legislation related to major topics such as church, government, education, social, political, and economic areas. It requires Spaniards settling or serving in the new colony to have a license or contract undertaking to settle or serve in the Philippines for a fixed period, usually 8 years. It also sets provisions of the powers and authority of the leaders of its colonies, like the gobernadorcillos. The laws and decrees in the Recopilación aim to regulate the interaction of the Spanish government and the natives and settlers of its conquered territories. The Pueblo lands. What are Pueblo lands, and who has ownership over Pueblo lands? Pueblo lands are communal lands assigned to natives or pueblos for their fields and labor. The allotment of Pueblo lands to the Filipinos was a practical necessity. The Spaniards would collect tribute by taking the Filipinos' produce from the Pueblo lands, which are mainly rice, wool, swine, coconut oil, cotton cloths, and rope from Abaca. Although these lands were assigned to the Filipinos, it was not their own property. The Recopilación and the ordinances of good governance did not recognize the natives' ancestral rights in land. Instead, these natives will be assigned lands which are owned by the Spanish king. This arose from the doctrine that the Spanish king is the owner of everything in value in its colonies over or the Indies. Hence, all the lands in the Philippines belong to him. The Mercedes. What are Mercedes, and who can dispose of the Mercedes, and for whom? Mercedes are land grants from the Spanish king or government. These are given to the Spaniards and the natives for the services that they offered and rendered to the crown. The people who received these grants are called principales. Polo y Servicios. What is Polo y Servicios, and who undergoes Polo y Servicios? Polo y Servicios is a compulsory labor of either Filipino or Chinese men between the ages of 16 and 60 years old. These people are required to serve for 40 days each year in community projects like the construction and repair of infrastructure, church construction, or log cutting in forests. The days required for forced labor were then reduced to 15 days in 1884. However, one could be exempted from polo by paying the fala, which is a fee that each polista is expected to pay daily during the 40-day period of working. This system is modeled after the Mexican repartimiento or selection for forced labor. Polo had negative effects on the Filipinos, such as upsetting the village economy because working days or labor drafts for polo usually coincided with the planting and harvesting seasons. It also forced polistas to be separated from their families and to work for many months away from home, leading to relocation to different places.
There were seven economic institutions introduced by Spain in the Philippines upon contact. The first one is taxation without representation, an income generating mechanism instituted by the Spanish colonial government in the Philippines. Consists of direct and indirect taxes such as the bandada, monopolies of crops and liquors, explosives, and opium. So under this economic custom, Filipinos were compelled to pay taxes to show loyalty to the King of Spain. Second is the polo y servicio personal or prestation personal, which according to Agoncillo, polo is a corruption of the Tagalog pulong, which originally meant meeting of persons and things or community labor. So this was a practice used by Spanish colonizers for over 250 years that required the forced labor of all Filipino or Chinese males aged 16 to 60 for 40-day periods until 1884 when labor was reduced to 15 days. So the workers could be assigned to any project the Spanish desired, such as the building and repairing of roads and bridges, church construction, and forest log cutting, regardless of how dangerous or unhealthy the conditions were. Third is the encomiendas, which is derived from the Spanish verb encomendar, which means to entrust, was another lucrative Hispanic institution that was brought to the Philippines via Mexico. So in principle, it was not a piece of land, but a favor from the king, for which deemed worthy Spaniards were given the legal right to rule over a specific place and subject its residents to forced labor. And the man who received this favor was called an encomendar, or encomendero, I'm sorry. So the encomendero was duty bound to safeguard his encomenda from outside attacks, maintain law and order, and help the missionaries spread the teachings of the Christian gospel to the locals within his jurisdiction. And in exchange, the encomendero received the right to collect tribute up to the amount and according to the standards established by higher authorities. So there are three kinds of encomiendas in the Philippines, namely the royal encomienda, which belonged to the king, the ecclesiastical encomienda, which belonged to the church, and lastly, the private encomienda, which belonged to a private individual. So fourth is the Manila Acapulco galleon trade. So the Manila galleons were Spanish treasure ships that transported precious goods like silk, spices, and porcelain from Manila across Asia to Acapulco, Mexico, between 1565 and 1815. And it was said that the galleon trade was actually a government monopoly, because only a privileged individuals, such as high-ranking officials of the state, the church, and the crews of the galleons were permitted to engage in trade. Fifth is the Royal Economy Society of Friends of the Country, which Jose de Basco y Vargas, following a royal order to form a society of intellectuals who can produce new, useful ideas formally established the Spanish Royal Economic Society of France, after the model of the Royal Back Society. So, composed of leading men in business, industry, and profession, the society was tasked to explore and exploit the island's natural bounties. So, the society led to the creation of the Plan General Economica of Basco, which implemented monopolies on the areca nut, tobacco, spirited liquors, and explosives. Also, the society, offered local and foreign scholarships and training grants in agriculture and established an academy of design. Six is the Royal Philippine Company. On March 10, 1785, King Charles III of Spain confirmed the establishment of the Royal Philippine Company with a 25-year charter. The Basque-based company was granted a monopoly on the importation of Chinese and Indian goods into the Philippines, as well as the shipping of the goods directly to Spain via the Cape of Good Hope. And lastly is the infrastructure, telecommunications, and public utilities development. Moving on, under Spanish colonization, Filipinos were compelled to pay tribute or tributo to the colonial government. On the account of Schumacher in 1979, he demonstrated that tribute was imposed as a show of allegiance to the King of Spain. Except for the principales, every Indio above the age of 16 and those below the age of 60 pay tributo reales, or what we call the amount paid in money or kind, to the royal treasury. So the amount varied between 8 and 14 reales over the years, but the Agustinian maintained that one maes, or 2.5 reales, is enough for each Indio to pay in tribute compared to the Chinese and Chinese mestizos who paid more. Also used as a population unit, a full tribute consisted of a man, his wife, and their minor children. In line with Schumacher's claim, Agoncillo stated that this tribute varies by region as well. So it could be palay or tobacco, chicken, textiles, or even wax and special local produce. So the tribute was said to have been fixed at 8 reales, or in gold, blankets, cotton, rice bells, in the 1570s, and then raised to 15 reales until the end of the Spanish period. So until the mid 19th century, Filipinos were bound to pay 10 reales in tribute, 1 real in diezmos prediales, 1 real in the town community trust, and 3 reales in the sanctorum tax for church support, for a total of 15 reales. And along with these health taxes comes special tax exemptions for descendants of the Filipino chiefly class who served in the conquistador pacification campaigns, most notably Carlos Lacandula of Manila, Pedro Mojica of Cavite, Raja Tupas of Cebu, as well as laborers of Cavite's arsenal and artillery yard, medicalios, vaccinators, and college and university students of Santo Tomas, San Jose, and San Juan de Letran, Cebu. According to Agoncillo 1990, compras reales, also referred to as bandala, derived from the Tagalog word maridala, which means a round stock of rice stalks to be trashed, is the type of direct tax that the Spaniards implemented in which the natives were forced to sell their goods to the government at extremely low prices. So under the bandala system, Pampanga, the Tagalog region, and the Rice Bowl of the Philippines took the brunt of what amounted to outright expropriation. So Constantino 1975 also forwarded that bandala amounted to virtual confiscation and that each province received annual quotas for their compulsory sale of products to the government at extremely low prices. So it has caused people a great deal of suffering because regardless of whether their crops were destroyed, they still have to buy rice in order to give it to the government on credit. And in November 1782, the bandala was abolished in the province of Tondo, Bulacan, Pampanga, Laguna, Batangas, Tayabas, and Cavite. And by 1884, the tribute was replaced by the cedula personal, wherein everyone over 18 was required to pay for personal identification, and the local gobernadorcillos were responsible for the collection of the tribute. Under the cedula system, taxpayers were individually responsible to Spanish authorities for payment of the tax and were subject to summary arrest for failure to show a cedula receipt. So the inquilinato system or the inquilino system is a qualified system of tenancy or the right to use land in exchange for rent. In this system, the inquilinos or leases of a hacienda paid a fixed rent or canon in money or in kind, who themselves had subtenants to work for the land, according to Schumacher 1979 and Constantino 1975. So when an inquilino subleased hacienda lands to subtenants or the kasama, the subtenants receive half of the harvest after the fixed rent was deducted, while the inquilino or the middleman receive the other half. So this custom benefits estate owners because it makes collecting what is owed them easier. But it is completely unfair to those who actually cultivate and care for the farm because they only receive half of the harvest after the ground rent is deducted, whereas the first leaseholder or the inquilino receives the other half simply by ensuring that the ground rent is paid without doing any additional work. As is customary in an exploitation hierarchy, the person at the bottom bore the brunt of it since only he actually worked the land and thus supported both the inquilino and the clerical landlord with his labor. So, under this shared tenancy arrangement, it appears that the wealthy inquilinos continued to profit far more than the kasama, who received only half of what remained after paying the canon. In practice, the inquilino served the same function as the cabeza and the gobernadorcillo. that is to facilitate his master's exaction. So, as an economic intermediary, the inquilino reaped the benefits of exploitation and could sometimes amass enough wealth to purchase land from impoverished native farmers and become a landowner himself. So, in addition, they are usually able to pass on lands they rented to their heirs, or for generation, dispose of the lands as if they own them, and sell the lands to those wealthier than themselves. And although these subleases are illegal, and the estate owner has the right to cancel the lease of whoever makes them, because they are easy to disguise or conceal, depriving them of the land is rare. So according to Corpus 1992, Sanlang Bilisang La Mortgage Police Sale is an agreement created for a loan transaction. That is, if families borrow money for festive events such as weddings, baptisms, funerals, and so on, the money lenders always require the borrower to pledge his parcel of land as a collateral. So the agreement was drawn up with the proviso that the borrower could repay the debt at any time, with the lender then obliged to return possession of the debtor's field. In the meantime, the entire harvest went to the lender, so the borrower ended up working his own parcel as the lender's tenant sharecropper. So by the 1780s, the old system of equal size fields had given way to turnovers in ownership of Pueblo lands, and the occupationally native population had given way to new agrarian relationships. The origin of the hacienda system dates back to the colonial past of the Philippines. It emerged as a result of capitalist linkage during the Spanish occupation as an economic and political unit, which grew stronger under American rule. So its very foundation is built on royal grants, the acquisition of royal estates or the realengas, the Pacto de Retroventa, and the land grabbing through land laws that resulted in the accumulation of vast estates. So the haciendas were used to pacify the native inhabitants and produce surplus for the colonialist consumption. Thus, according to Constantino, it is safe to say that the hacienda system arose largely as a result of the expropriation of numerous small farmers. Although it appeals as an encomienda, a colonial appropriation, they are not the same, and one does not necessarily lead to the other. So, evident from the given circumstances is that the exploitative relationship in the hacienda are based on and grow out of the ownership of the tracts of land from which the tenants derive their livelihood. So, the haciendero has the right of inheritance and free disposition because he owns the land. He conceals his exploitation behind the guise of a partnership, hence the term kasamahan to denote a joint venture and the tenant's designation as a kasama or companion. Cosentino further demonstrated that this nuance, claiming that the hacienda system was a new historic form of exploitation designed to meet the needs of the new period. So although the hacienda system retained feudal characteristics, its practices having been inherited from the original religious estates, which had in turn adopted in modified form the ancient practice of sharecropping. Its growth was an offshoot of capitalist development. So there remains fundamental unrest as the product of economic development. The decline of certain local industries as a result of the inroads of foreign trade brought acute deprivation to whole communities. Economic progress itself has nurtured a popular consciousness more acutely aware of injustice and inequality, the fruits of more efficient means of exploitation. Of all the trades and people that met in Manila, the most important for its survival and existence as a center for world trade was the silk for silver exchange between the merchants of southern Fujian and New Spain is the Manila Acapulco galleon trade, which lasted from 1565 till 1815. This trade was the sole means of communication between Spain and its Philippine colony and served as an economic lifeline for the Spaniards in Manila. For 2.5 centuries, this maritime trading has been the main economic activity in the colony, leading Manila to prosperity as the single metropolis of the country, and the principal beneficiary is the local Spaniards with the luxuries they required. Manila became a trading post for Chinese and New Spanish merchants, bridging America and Asia for the first time. Manila connected silver hungry Chinese markets with silver rich New Spanish merchants looking for investment opportunities. The profits from this trade allowed Manila to build its strong walls and imposing structures. Some of the proceeds from the galleon trade were left to religious orders to fund charitable endeavors, such as the establishment of schools, hospitals, and charitable institutions. Of course, the friars used the obra's pious money to finance their own participation in the lucrative galleon trade, according to Constantino. So during this time, there was a high level of intercultural exchange between the Americas and the Philippines. And the return voyage brought numerous and valuable flora and fauna to the Philippines, including avocado, guava, papaya, pineapple, horses, cattle, and the concept of kite fighting, among others.
The Patronato Real. What is a Patronato Real? Who are the parties in a Patronato Real? What is the political economic system best exemplified by the Patronato Real? The Patronato Real is the royal patronage by which the king financed the church in the Indies, and as patron had the right to present and therefore, in effect, appoint all ecclesiastical positions in the Church of the Indies. The term patronato refers to the right conferred by competent ecclesiastical authority to a personage to bear the responsibility of providing for the administration and maintenance of religious benefice. Notable of these regalist expansions of the patronato was the Passe Regio, by which any form of communication, such as papal decrees or letters of the generals of religious orders, between the Church and Indies had no effect unless approved by the Consejo de Indias, or Council of the Indies. The parties involved in a patronato real are the patronage and the patron. The right of patronage at law amounts to the sum of privileges and duties of the founders of churches and other ecclesiastical enterprises. The patronage can be classified into two: private patronage and public or crown patronage. The private patronage is restricted to a single or corporate donor who is either a king or a commoner. In public or crown patronage, the sovereign endowed the spiritualities of the land and is vested with quasi-religious rights over royal territory, becomes part of the machinery of government. Both have features in common as wide-reaching social institutions, but crown patronage may hold great power in politics. On the other hand, the patron is the one who endows a place of divine worship and who is in turn bestowed with particular rights. According to Shields 1961, three things belong to the patron by reason of patronage: honor, the support that he deserves when in trouble, and the care he should have to watch over spiritual work. The Obras Pias. What is an Obras Pias? Who conducts the Obras Pias? Where goes the Obras Pias? So apart from being landowners, the clergy were influential in the country's economic activity. An avenue from this involvement was the Obras Pias, foundations founded by affluent churchmen and lay persons for pious and charitable works, such as building schools and hospitals. The Hermandad de la Misericordia was the earliest charitable institution, founded in 1596. Alcaldes and governors borrowed money from the Obras Pias in order to conduct business inside their respective regions. When the government ran out of money, it turned to these institutions for assistance. Several foundations provided funding to galleon shippers. Friars also borrowed from the Obras Pias funds to finance their participation in the galleon trade. What were the cultural institutions introduced by Spain in the Philippines? These are the Reducciones, the Cabecera, Visita, Iglesia Católica, and Escuelas de Pueblos de ambos sexos. The reducciones. What are reducciones? How did it alter the landscape upon entry of Spanish administration in the islands? So, as mercantilism at that period largely focused on trading activities rather than internal economic growth, the extraction of tribute and forced labor, as well as the evangelizing tradition of Spanish colonization, necessitated the systematic extension of administrative power. As a result, the barangay had to be integrated into the colonial framework. Reducción is the process of gathering together the scattered settlements of Indios into villages or towns to make possible lasting evangelization. It was part of the Spanish colonial experience in Latin America, which revealed that once Indians were resettled in compact villages, they were more quickly and efficiently organized for colonial objectives. It became the model for the Philippines, with the difference being that in Spain's American colonies, it was carried out jointly by church and state, but in the Philippines was primarily the work of the friars. So a couple hundred of friars and Spanish officers could not carry out their colonialist objectives for a population of around 750,000 resided in thousands of small communities spread throughout the islands. So the solution rested in a program of resettlement or reduction that would concentrate population in larger villages. But for the native population, moving to village was both impractical and contradictory to their traditional way of life. They needed to live near the land they labored on and in areas where they could conveniently hunt and fish for sustenance. So the friars adopted various methods to win native support to resettlement, such as offering gifts, promising free housing, and novelty of mass participation. However, friars were known to resort to threats and other forms of coercion if these tactics were ineffective. Oftentimes, barangays would choose resettlement out of fear. Recognizing the power of ecclesiastical authorities, others sought protection from the persecution and cruelty of encomenderos or soldiers by joining religious communities. The Cabecera complex. What is the Cabecera complex? What are the edifices usually located in a cabecera? What are the other names associated with the cabecera? So the cabecera is the center of the pueblo or town, also known as a poblacion. The edifices located in each cabecera are the iglesia, which is the church, the heart of the cabecera, escuelas de pueblos por los niños, and escuelas de pueblos por los niños, established at opposites of the iglesia, were gender-segregated schools. The Casa Municipal, where the Gobernadorcillo holds office, and Guardia Civil are situated. The mercado or the market, and the sultanahan or the cockpit. Because the church was so vital in the Spanish colonial framework, and not just as a religious institution, but also as an economic and political force, it was logical for people to gravitate toward the edifice that signified its power. The cabecera became the epicenter of activity and cultural transformation. It was given functional significance and social prestige, distinguishing it from other settlement clusters to this day. The Visita and Iglesia Católica. So each poblacion was surrounded by subordinate villages or barrios, and even smaller communities known as sitios. Because of Filipinos' resistance to settle far from their lands, the friars had to adapt to this aspect of native life in the Philippines by building chapels in the communities. So Visita is a small settlement with only a chapel, but no resident priest. It is located in the barrio within the cabecera. It serves as the assembly point for major parish occasions, with its center of attraction being the Iglesia Católica. The term visita iglesia refers to the periodic visits of a priest or cura parroco to these areas for mass and the teaching of Christian doctrine. These have become a tradition through the Spanish friars and missionaries to visit these small settlements from time to time. Escuelas del Pueblos de ambos sexos. So, what constitutes the escuelas of Spanish time? So, the earliest schools in the Philippines were established in accordance with Charles V's proclamation of July 17, 1550, that Indios in all of Spain's colonies were to be taught the conqueror's language. As part of the conversion, the Spanish missionaries in the Philippines engaged children in the idea that they would learn La Cartilla, the Spanish alphabet, La Castellana, the Spanish language, and La Doctrina Cristiana, the Christian doctrine and traditions, policies, and pass them later on. In addition, linked with the strategy of converting the Filipino chiefly class was the establishment of a secondary school for the sons of native governing families, in preparation not only for Christianization, but also for future gobernadorcillos and cabezas de barangay. So boys' colleges, schools, and secondary schools. So the earliest colleges exclusively for sons of Spaniards were established in the Philippines by the Society of Jesus. The Colegio Maximo de San Ignacio, which later became a university, in 1621. The College of San Ildefonso, which is now the University of San Carlos, the sole secondary school outside of Manila, located in Cebu, and the Residential College of San Jose, opened with only 13 students back in 1601. So the College of Immaculate Concepcion in 1859 is now the Ateneo de Manila University. It grew out of the Escuela Pia for poor boys in 1817 and was founded by the Jesuits upon their return from expulsion. So the tertiary education for boys and girls. So the University of Santo Tomas, Colegio de Nostra Senora del Santissimo Rosario, it converted into the Dominican University in 1645. Colegio San Juan de Letran in 1620 was named Seminario de Niños Huérfanos de San Pedro y San Pablo, original founded for orphan Spanish children. It was considered the oldest secondary school in the Philippines. So, girls' school. The first boarding schools for Spanish girls in the Philippines were Colegios de Santa Potenciana in 1591 to 1864 and Santa Isabel in 1632. It is now considered the oldest schools for girls in the archipelago, originally founded for the benefit of orphan Spanish girls. Besides this, exclusive colegios for the daughters of upper-class Spaniards were called beaterios, established for young girls called beatas who led a secluded life. So these were the Beaterio de la Compañía de Jesús, now the Religious of the Virgin Mary, founded in 1684. Santa Catalina de Sena, San Sebastian de Calumpang, now Santa Rita College, Santa Rita de Pasig, and Santa Rosa. Two Beaterios were developed by Filipino women to teach Spanish culture and values to young Filipinas. So these were the Religious of the Virgin Mary RVM Sisters and the Beaterio de San Sebastian de Calumpang of the Orden Terciaras de Recoletos. So that is all for our report. Thank you for listening.